So one of the things that I wanted to speak to is that with all of the one page stories that I did, last year, and the one page and the different lengths of stories that I've done over time, um, a big challenge that people have is really getting started and getting ready into the approach of how do I lay out a page. Now, there's a few different ways that people will start working. Oftentimes, people will start with a script, and if they've got a script, that script somewhat delineates the information that you need to have on your page. If you're working on your own and you write a script in advance and you tend to have been developing those visuals for yourself as you're writing said script. Um, some people that do the writing and illustrating part don't really lay out a script. They lay out instead a plot, or a rough plot, as it's sometimes called. And so what that is a loose framework of here's the gist of the thing that we need to happen, and here's the larger notes of it. Here's the larger moments along the way in the structure of this story of whatever determinable length. Now, the longer and more involved and complex the story is, you're generally not rough plotting it. At the very least, you've got it mapped out, and so that would be the third approach to how you're going about working. So this would be page information approach. So what this is telling us is either we've got the whole thing supplied, all of the information that we need, or we've got a rough idea of the different situations, moments, visual images that need to happen. Or if it's a larger and more complex thing, we know all of these key scenes, key moments, key engagements, what characters are going where and who's engaging and what image from the next. So mapping is where we get more complex, right? And so, and then there's of course the the fly by the seat of your pants, and so what that basically is you've got an idea. It's not even a plot. There's no structure to it at all. It's just an idea. This is the one that I predominantly use, of course. And when I'm doing the one page stories and they're really short few page pieces, I've got an idea, or I've got a suggestion of a couple of sentences, or I've got 3 words. And so that's really where my starting point is. So with that information coming in, what I need to decide then is all of those little key pieces of information, like, what style am I going to do it in, and what materials am I going to do it in. Excuse me. My throat's trying to come back. It's just a frog in my throat today. So then the next decisions I need to do, is what medium am I going to use? What style am I going to use? There's considerations for like pacing, or for what is, like, if the idea is a clown blows up a balloon, well, there's different, I'm trying to think of the right term, but what I'm referring to is the dramatic approach. And so what I mean by that is, if a clown is going to blow up a balloon, well, we can have a person who's a lifelong clown, who might not even necessarily be all made up, but he's behind the scenes, maybe even watching TV. He's got crackers on a plate, a cup of tea or something, and he's watching television. In his trailer, well, he's got a helium pump, and he's filling balloons, tying it off, putting it over there, filling balloons, tying it off, putting it over there, and it becomes a nonsensical scene, in that there's nothing really further to it than that, other than here's just a glimpse of behind the scenes of a clown. That's a pretty straight on thing. But what I mean by the dramatic part of it is you can either really overly hyper focus on putting all this tension in the whole. He looks at the tank, he stretches the balloon, he puts it on the edge of the tank, it blows out, he's ties it, holds it up, lets it go, and it floats. And now you get your symbolic whatever. That's one way you can have the dramatic setting, like the lighting. It's nighttime, so there's really intense lighting. And while the viewer, the audience might not immediately understand he's sitting in front of a television, you've got this hard cast light making these fantastically interesting shadows on the character and his environment. So as he's blowing his balloon up and there's this intensity, and it carries through the entire piece of, oh boy, there's a scary clown. And then we get to the last panel, and it's a turnaround. So we're looking at, the clown sitting on a couch from behind, and he's watching Friends. It's just, or he's watching cartoons or whatever it is, something just innocuous. And so that dramatic approach, or that dramatic choice that we're going to make about how we're going to come at, like, what's the tone of the piece? So all these little decisions that we make once we've got this idea, or this larger mapped out story, or this script, or just this general rough plot we're working from. So that's when we decide how are we going to come at it. And in the course of doing so, can change dramatically this prepared material. Well, here's a script. Okay. And I got this script, and it's about two, young people in college that have met each other for the first time, and are, it's, it's just a dramatic romance. Like it's what's that called? It's a romantic comedy. It's, starring a young Kevin Kline. I don't know. But the point is that these two characters are, will they, won't they, kind of a story. But that's straightforward. That's the straightforward through line. What we've got in a decision, and of what we can do with this script, is that we can take it and draw the entire thing with like this intensity of, like a horror story or a horror film. And so everything has this sense of dread, or this sense of larger dramatic scope. And so because of that dark offering to it, it changes the tone of the romantic comedy. Well, it makes it a really, it would be more like a dark humor. That's one direction. Or, another one is where visually we can start to incorporate elements that are just surreal. And so it becomes almost this fantastic fairy tale like romantic comedy, where, they're tipping their toe into the water as they're skipping across the surface of the lake, and holding hands and looking at each other in this really romantic way. And you take it to an extreme to really embrace the comedic aspect of it, and have that sort of behavior, and that illustrative work where it's all this fantasy and romantic fantasy as they're going to get a hot dog, and you've got they're looking at each other, and each of them are biting the ends of the hot dog. Oh, we're so funny. It's as they come into the kiss at the end, and it's one of those things where, like, how we approach the tone of the story and how we decide to execute the imagery can really, really play with something. When you're given a job, like with a plot or a script, or when somebody is offering that to people, I think it's really important to assess not just the ability of the individuals that are being brought in on a project, but also their style. because there's a real thing that's starting to happen now where there's all these pieces that are being executed with people whose styles are this sort of, it's hard to express, but they're very cute, and they're supposed to be doing these really deep, meaningful, emotional, nuanced pieces, whereas everybody looks like badly drawn Western manga. And it takes you out of the narrative. It takes you out of the story. When you've got, it's no different than when like an independent artist draws like a mainstream superhero character, and their style doesn't lead towards the sort of language that those type of rules for drawing superhero books, and they're clearly an indie alternative artist, and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Very rarely are there exceptions to that. I would argue that people like um, Paul Pope has pulled it off. You know, he's a very stylized individual illustrator, and he did some mainstream superhero stories, and it works because of the hyper, uh, the hyper stretched sort of physicalities and scenarios and these action lines and all of this dramatic line work with his inks. He sells it, but I've seen a few different people that are trying to do the same thing, emulating that style, and it just doesn't work because there's very clearly a level of sophistication from how that artist Paul Pope has developed himself. So there are exceptions to anything uh, in any approach to a story, but for the largest part, there's just a general dialogue that you want to execute, and you want to have that sort of tone um, as its through line. Now, Louis Trondheim's a French author who I enjoy, and he has written a number of pieces, and he's worked with a number of different illustrators, and oftentimes those illustrators, their style of expression fits the tone of that story. And there's one instance that I've got Invincible 8, Infinity 8, I'm sorry. It's a series of 8 books where he's worked with a whole bunch of different artists to tell this sci-fi epic piece. Each one of these chapters of these 8 books, taken as a whole, is this larger dramatic story. But stylistically, despite the differences in the artists and their formal illustrative voice, it still holds up because there's at least not such a massive departure from the tone, the through line, stylistic through line of the story, even though they're all quite different and have their very own finishing styles to it. You know, I really enjoy that series. It's a really fantastic series, and that is a rare. I think that is more rare than people realize today. Is there's an awful lot of problems of getting trying to encourage a broader marketplace and trying to encourage a lot of voices from outside of the norm to come in and take a crack at material that has its own existing set of rules, whereas this creator doesn't necessarily fit. And it's a real hit and miss scenario for sure. So when you're looking at choosing your style and your medium, and your dramatic tone, your through like that moves as a through line through the piece, these different factors are very important. Now, the other part of it that we're going to look at in a second is in that through line that I referred to, in that the through line of execution, there are things that need to come into place now, like pacing, right? And in that stylistic choice that's coming in is where you're breaking down the page in and of itself. And so you want to have a consistency to your pages and how you're roughly laying them out. And there's massive sweeps of differences that can be done here. So I'll show you a couple things, because this is where we're going to sort of step to and sit here for a second. There's a couple of pieces of information that I think would be of benefit. Now, depending on the start right off at the top, depending on the layout of the page, now this is a portrait format. P is for portrait. Okay, and then I'll write it underneath. And then this one here is what's called a landscape format. Landscape is what I've been largely working in for the last year, specifically with the one-page story pieces. Those are all in a landscape format in a uniform size. So what these are, this is the frame of reference. What it really is the shape of the page. And oftentimes in a landscape format, the binding is along this edge here, so that you flip the book like so. And in a portrait, it's the same, but you can see how it's, pardon me, you can see how these two squares are the same size, just moving in different directions. Upright, side to side, vertical, horizontal. However it works best for you to put it down in your head. Portrait and landscape is another way of saying it. Okay, so I'm going to show a couple of different ways. I'm missing stuff. Oh no, it just popped up. Okay, hi Yolanda, how are you doing today? Welcome aboard. So what I'll do now is that now that we're at this stage, we're starting to look at breaking down an idea. There's a couple of different ways that we can do this. And I'll show you in both the portrait and in the landscape format. I've got a real frog in my throat, and I apologize for that. My throat is relatively back. The coughing thing is gone. It's just a frog in my throat today. I apologize. I've had a few drinks. I don't know what's going on. So if this is our page, okay, and there's a portrait, and there's our landscape. What we want to do, and what's really important for us in the Western storytelling market. Now, in the Western storytelling market, the story starts in the top left corner when we're looking at a page in either of these two formats, and it moves to the bottom right. Now, you can see the difference in the shapes of these two pages. So that would mean that we start up here and move down here, and we start up here and we move down here. Those are our objectives. However many panels, okay, and a panel is a square or some kind of shape or some kind of form on the page, because oftentimes a panel can be just a person swinging with a void around them. That would still be considered a panel, because it's that void area has a shape and form that divides it from the one before and the one after it. So it still counts as a panel. But the objective is to get the story to move from top left to bottom right. Now, and along the way, you can have as many panels as you want to take you there. You can have as many levels as you want. You can have no panels whatsoever and just a large splash image. It's called a splash because it just sort of spills out over the page. I've got more people jumping in. Jane's joining us. Hi, Jane. Welcome aboard. Yolanda says, my boys had a manga graphic novel. I could never get the hang of reading it. Very confusing for my Western mind. It's the opposite of what we do here. And it is challenging. It can be challenging when you're so used to the opposite way of your eye moving on a page. The example that I'm showing today, specifically citing Western style storytelling. Top left, bottom right. So, with that, there's a couple of things that have been utilized over time, and where people will have uniform size panels on their page. And so these uniform panels is no different. A smart way to think about this, I believe, is music. Okay, so if you look at this on a chart for music, each of these panels is a note, single spacing, that, 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 that. There's no, it's just the rhythmic beat. And the reason that I say it's the rhythmic beat is the smaller that these panels get, the faster it becomes, almost like a staccato rhythm. So that because your eye just jumps from one small piece of information to small piece of information, and you move through this the larger surface, the frame of reference, the surface area, faster. And as you have, so if we have, I did this to myself, I shouldn't have said all the tiny panels. So if we've got all of these smaller panels, you can see how your eye is just going with the information. And so the flip side of that, of course, is the larger panel. And the larger panel slows the viewer down. So if we look at it as speed, as pacing, this is our pacing part, okay, then the more panels, the faster it gets. The less panels, we slow the reader down. Now, more is faster. This is a visual note that I'm making. Visual panels, more is faster, less slows reader down. Now, the flip of that is the text. The more text, I like that Jane says, staccato pacing until boom. There's a really fantastic piece by Colin Wilson called The Briefcase, and it's about somebody has left a briefcase at the sun, like just on the landing at a train station. You know, the landing of the boardwalk, as people stand here to wait to get on a train. Well, somebody's just left a briefcase sitting in the center of the boardwalk. And these times are uncertain, and we don't know what could be in that briefcase. It's just a briefcase. They left a briefcase. I don't know if it's just a briefcase. It could be. There's terrorists. There's terrorists today. And so you get these two, really divergent opinions about what that briefcase might be by these two characters. But the story isn't about the briefcase. The story is about the two characters and how they engage with it. But you can raise the stakes and raise the intensity on the story by having, if you just have a page that's got nothing but the briefcase over and over again, there's an unnerving sense of that. And why are we lingering on this for so long with all this text being spoken above it? Or if you have a page that in each of these 9 panels, let's say if it's broken down on a 9-panel format, the briefcase gets larger and larger into each frame. Even though the frames are the same size, there's still a sense of intensity leading up to a necessity of release, right? Or as Jane puts it, the boom, or is it a boom? Is it a fizzle? Is it a pop? Is it nothing? Just what if this is it? What if we're going to die? What if, the briefcase is, what if, when you get closer to the frame and then you flip the page and you utilize a wider panel like this to slow the pace rate down as the two of them are just standing here side by side, and here's your briefcase just sitting there in the middle of the boardwalk. What if nothing happens? The second guy says to the first guy, and so you can manipulate the reader in a sense, or you can carry the reader along, as I prefer to think of it, with dramatic intensity, emotional intensity, in whatever varying degrees, And so you can do this with the pacing, the repetitive nature of panels. Heavy dialogue means slowing it down, right? So the visual panels, the more visual panels, the faster you go. The less visual panels, the more it slows it down. But text in panels is the opposite. The more text that the reader has to read, the more it slows down it changes the immersion of the story because, it changes the immersion of the story because you're not just, panel, briefcase, 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 briefcase. No, you've got these two characters that are talking over top of it. I mean, I heard a thing on the news last night. There's terrorist activity that's been going on in major cities like this. They're trying to wipe out the infrastructure and keep us all from traveling from places because that way they can control us and isolate us from each other and stop us from rising up against whoever's trying to control the system. And you get this person who's going on in this diatribe, this thesis that they're presenting over all these different panels. And even though it's a static image repeating itself in these panels, there's this massive information dump and of theories that could possibly change how you're looking at the object in the shot. In this case, the briefcase. So text in a panel, more equals slow. The more you got to read, the more your pacing is carried by the words more than the visual image. And so it slows it down, right? And then less, it lets you jump. And if there's less text, it jumps you over to the visual component, because if it's just got the two of them standing there on the platform is the word I've been looking for. If the two different people are standing on the platform for the train, and we've gone through this emotional intensity of the previous page of these repetitive panels, and then we flip the page and it's just the two of them standing there, and there's the briefcase, and there's no text. Those are the moments that allows the reader, their own association is going to surmise an outcome. They're going to go where nothing happens. Like they're going to fill that in, and then you can drop, so on a page like that, let's say where we've got all this and the building intensity, and then we flip the page and here's the two guys in the briefcase. And then and then we go back into the rhythm of it, where person A says to person B, or nothing happens. Seriously, you're getting me freaked out now. Like, so that's entirely up to you and how much you play with that. Pardon me. Yolanda, this is very interesting. It could be anything, any outcome, and it's up to you. It's up to you as the creator to make those choices. Now, if you're an illustrator who's following a script, then there's a plot layout that's been established by the writer, and ideally you're hired to enhance that that written script with the visual components, and it's all about the fusion of the two and how they work together. Writers write, that's great. Artists draw, but if we have an understanding between the two of story and then visual, ability to convey story, it gives you a third aspect to it, and with that fusion aspect, where the words and the visuals work together. One picks up the ball, and then the other one picks up the ball, or the two of them are carrying the ball together. It's all about, choices. So Jane says, I like this discussion of how the visual pacing can control or direct your story. Be the briefcase. There you go. Listening. Yeah. So the reader now jumps in and makes those choices, right? And in their own way, they're starting to input themselves, especially if you leave them moments like that one panel we've discussed right here. That leaves them a moment to, is it going to blow up? Or the other person says, or it does nothing. So then we get back into our pacing. Now, I'm using this repetitive block panel approach. And we're going to come back to this again in a second. But when I am using this block panel approach instead of getting creative with it is because we're just trying to example ways to take you from here to here, and using a static size of panel gives us a static rhythm in our storytelling. You know, there's a great film by Alfred Hitchcock where he talks, there's a couple in a car, and it starts off with somebody putting a bomb in the back of the car. And then we cut to the shot of this young couple as they're, at this vacation town, and they're looking at this and they're looking at that, and they're traveling through the main street. But because of the speed of traffic, because pedestrians moving back and forth through the traffic, they tend to stay in step with this car that's driving that we know has a bomb in it. But what we're witnessing and what we're engaged in is this happy couple. Look at this. What do you think of this dress? Oh, I think this dress will look lovely on you. Oh, I don't know. Well, we'll come back to it. Maybe we'll buy it then. And oh, look at this place. Isn't this quaint? Oh, I like this sort of things, but we don't need that sort of stuff, And, these conversations that they're having as they're moving through the space. But what you're really concerned about is the proximity of that car, that couple, and the fact that there's a bomb in it. Not just the people that are in the car, it's also the couple, because we're invested in that emotional component. We're invested in that story that's being narrated to us. A little bit of textual interlude, a little bit of dialogue you can hear coming through, but primarily you're looking at happiness. Happiness, dread. Now, some people are going to focus on the dread. There's some people are going to be like, it's going to go off in a second. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be so cool. Stupid people. Some people are going to be like, oh my goodness, I hope they turn away from the car. Right? And it's a choice of you as the storyteller to try to present some pieces of information for then the reader to make some choices on how they're interpreting it. And how they interpret it, you only have control of in so much as what you present them for information. That's all. If you omit something, they don't get it because you omitted a key piece of information or a key piece of context that would have made sense of the whole thing or would have had them feel like they could connect to the happy couple. Like if you forget to show the bomb going in the back of the car at the start of the whole thing, who cares? There's no impending sense of dread. Try to keep up here. Yolanda says, Hitchcock was a great storyteller. Absolutely. Absolutely brilliant. By the way, what are you listening today? Today's it's a mixed bag now, but it started off as Cake. The band Cake. Album called Fashion Nugget, and now it's Everclear. But excuse me, I'm just gonna get another drink. So that pacing, that breakdown, we are now able to reassess how we're going to direct our reader. Now, the other part I want to show you in pacing and breakdown is size of panel. Yolanda says, I love Cake, both the food and the band. Everclear, 99% proof? Yeah, there we go. Everclear is, which song is it? It's Santa Monica. Okay, so the other thing is, now that we've got this page, and this application works uniformly between the portrait or the landscape format. Okay. So the other part of it is this. If we've talked about the more or less for panels. And then the other part with the visual panels is size. Now, the thing about size is Smaller panels, okay, you can only get so much information in a smaller panel. Somebody getting really, let's see, now it's Modest Mouse. Mixed bag, this playlist. So the smaller panel only lets you get so much information in there. A larger panel gets you lots of information in it. And it changes dramatically the dynamic of this pacing thing that we're talking about. Now, smaller panels, again, they expedite the scene depending on their allocation in the space. But if you've got, you can do things with the pacing, like you can break them up, and then by the third, you can do something like this with these smaller panels, and then you can be creative and have those overlapping a larger panel in the background. So let's say that this is the train station in this larger panel. But these smaller panels are, do you see that? Do I see what? Is that a briefcase? Yes, so. So it's a briefcase. Somebody left their briefcase. Yeah, at a train station. Oh my God. But you want your text to fuse with those panels. If you have these tiny panels where you're trying to move action forward at heightening the pace, and you have this ton of dialogue above, it never makes any sense. Because you've got this whole, do you see that? Oh my goodness, here's the thing. There's a thing. That's a thing. That's a go. I don't want to be here. You don't want to be here. But when you've got all this verbosity that's going on around it, you're just stripping the whole point of having these tiny panels away from you. So the visual panels and the size needs to work in relationship with the text like that. But it expedites the pacing on a different level, because smaller panels, less to look at, the more our eyes move along. The larger panels, more to look at, ideally, so that our eyes slow down and we take in, we're looking all over that frame of reference. So that when you've got your full, size page and you've got your image, singular image, makes you slow right down to see that. Now, this is the part that becomes interesting, because with the splash page, which is what it's called, because it's like a large splash of an image, there's a couple things that can happen. You can look at examples like Will Eisner. Will Eisner has a large splash image where it has a fella teetering on one foot as he's walking, and with a bottle of drink in his hand, and then he leans over an edge. Like it's the same guy. So as he's walking here, and he's got his little bottle of the bad stuff, and as he looks, he looks over the edge, and he's flapping his arms like he thinks he's a bird, and he's already dropped his booze. But in the image, he's drawn this large, broad image that has these repetitive things happen. So then we've got our fella falling, down to the ground here, and then here he is lying on the ground. And just to sort of sell it that he's dead, he's drawn an angel of himself looking at his dead body. That's one static splash, one large-scale image. But they're breaking the rules by having really what is a number of panels, actions of a bunch of panels happening along the way. Generally, a lot of splash images that we see today is, here's your Spider-Man guy, and he's swinging in the foreground, and, his arms are here, and his, here's his foot, and his other leg is kicked up in the foreground, and then it's this big building shot, like this city shot as he's flying through the panel towards the viewer. So Yolanda says, like borderless panels. Exactly, borderless panels. Exactly. But the Will Eisner reference is that he would actually draw the scene so that we've got a sidewalk and a construction pit, and the guy falls down into the construction pit, and here he is lying on the ground in the bottom of the construction pit with his little ghost standing above him. So it's actually a unified image with multiple actions of the same character throughout it, but it still operates as borderless panels. It still operates as a timed structure of images through the page. Whereas you've got large splash image of a guy flying across, the city on a web, you're going to be afforded a couple things here. Because of one large static image, this is where you can do this massive info dump. Oh, I better get home before Aunt May realizes that I'm out. She still doesn't suspect that I'm Spider-Man. Also, I need to get some bread, And then you've got room here for your title at the bottom, and there's some publishing indicia about copyright and all that business. It can still fit over the same image. But the pacing is now how fast you read the dialogue. One big image, but the pacing is entirely dialogue. Right? So the visual panel size, the smaller, slower, the smaller is faster, but it has to be simpler. Right? And then the larger is slower. Is that thing? Yeah, larger is slower, but you can have more complexity. So whether that complexity is in the visual elements, like this example from Will Eisner, and Will Eisner is a creator of The Spirit in 1938. He also is the first guy that did graphic novels of his long-form stories. He adapted Hamlet as well and set in the Bronx in New York in 1968. He was a really fantastic guy. Pardon me. And this is your modern Spider guy, Batman guy, who is flying through the air and his underwear on the outside, talking about getting bread. So the larger image is slower, but you can have more complexity in it. Whether it's more complex visual, like we have in here, all this textual info dump, more complex textual. And then all kinds of ornate design in the buildings and so on and so forth. Yeah, either way, you're lingering on this page. When it's done right, that's how it works. When it's done wrong, you have splash pages with no text. And there's a 90s conceit where you'd have these splash pages in books. Well, let's go then, is all the guy's saying as he's jumping at another dude with a sword above his head. It's kind of like a Michael Bay film or a Zack Snyder film where it's all about the spectacle and not about the story. Zack Snyder just put out a new film called Rebel Moon, and it's about this collection of characters coming together in order to fight against this bad guy system, and no character developed for anybody other than just a quick info dump. This is what my life was before this, but you never see any interaction between any of the characters outside of the principal two leads and the actor of note who gets all the talking parts. It's not great storytelling, but the spectacle is what makes people really, really love it. 5 or 6 pages in a row are ho-hum. I know, right? Yes and no. There's an example in a book called Next Wave by Warren Ellis and Stuart Immonen. And what Stuart does is it has this running gatefold. And the gatefold is when the book opens up and you get the picture that goes from here, from the one side, right over to the other. And the action conveys across. I guess it would be this way. It's reverse for... No, I guess it's... Yeah, no, it's the right way. It's reversing for me. So but there's all this dialogue and the characters interacting as they're going through this gauntlet of bad guys on all these different levels in order to get to the big bad guy to win the day. And he does it very successfully. They do it very successfully, the writer and the artist, because they've managed to give enough interest in the visual elements that the info dump doesn't feel as contrived, and it doesn't feel like a laborious slog because of the quality of the what information you are given, but more specifically the quality of the visual images that carry us through. Good, Warren Ellis and Stuart Immonen, brilliant writer, storyteller, and a brilliant illustrator, storyteller, and the two of them together was a nice combination. Okay, so that takes us through the pacing, the breakdown. So the open panel, the closed panel. So you've got your open panel, you've got your closed panel, you've got your sizes of panels. You know, you can have a combination of those. That isn't the usual outcome for most. No, it's not. You're right. And it's not to say it can't be done. No, I completely appreciate that, Jane. I hope you didn't think I was saying that you said, nope, can't be done. I completely agree with you that it can be generally ho-hum and generally if you're looking for a fusion of pictures and words, you're not going to enjoy that. If you're looking for crazy art and that's your primary, you're going to enjoy that kind of a book more. But you're not, over time, the more that we take in something, the more that we appreciate and enjoy something, invest ourselves in something, the more that we're going to look for broader tastes of it. You know, you like reading novels. You're not only going to read one author for the entirety of your life. You're just not going to do that. And have any kind of discernible taste. You're just a machine on a conveyor belt of whatever's coming next from said author. Stephen King is unfairly used a lot for that. The range of quality in his books is vast. He's got some fantastic books and he's got some really awful ones, but he keeps putting them out. And people who read a lot of Stephen King will have you tried Peter Straub or another artist like him? No. Why not? You know, you might find that takes you someplace that you're looking for something that resonates on a slightly different frequency, a slightly higher frequency, or that it can. You're just missing out. You're just missing out, and you're only ever going to enjoy the taste of Stephen King. You're only ever going to eat hot dogs. You know, so people like hot dogs. You know, not to just dismiss a percentage of the populace, but a lot of people like hot dogs. No. What about hamburgers? No. Hot dog. Okay, that's a hot dog person, and let them be. Jane says, variety is the spice of life. There you go. True. So with your open panels, with your closed panels, with the sizes of your panels, you can also play in the shape of panels. Let's try to spell the word correctly. Shape of panels. And so what I mean by that is, you know, oftentimes you'll see me do things like I'm going to pull up, I'm going to switch the cameras for a second and put on the page that I did today. Now, the first image on the left-hand side is clearly a panel. There's a clear panel. And it's just, here's some crazy rocket thing that the nasties have invented. And it refers to the text where he says, all the crazy contraptions these nasty people have been making are nothing but bad news, right? But then we switch over into this let us leap away, and we're following it because that text is up there in that top portion and breaking across the two panels. So now it makes our eye move with it. So it's not just the visuals that tell us which way to go, it's the text. And then we've got these two characters and leap, let us leap away. So this lady's clearly leaping more like a frog than he is. I don't know why. Sometimes you just draw. And they're on their way to their UFO machine with the little circle windows at the top. And then describe all these other crazy gadgets the nasties have been coming up with. And we're looking at them in their machine in the circles at the bottom. But there's so many images that are collaged over top of that first and second panel. And in that third panel, you only see the corner of it because the UFO spaceship with the two characters in it encompasses most of that, and even into some of the second one. But the collage stuff just sits over top of everything else. But those are like shape panels, right? So they defy a really static, specific, similar style, similar approach in your storytelling and your pacing. So a page like the one that I showed you that I did today, and if you want to look back to it, you can see it on the Instagram or the Facebook. And then on my Patreon, I always show the art without any of the text or embellishment, so if people are interested in that as well. So now we've broken some of the rules of the static size panels and the pieces of information as presented. Because we have a different level of understanding about how we can make these things work together, closed panels and open panels, we can have shaped panels, we can have overlapping panels, and oftentimes you'll see an artist have their first panel here, okay, and then the second panel will be right here, but it starts on the page like so. So our second panel, which moves all the way across the image, is actually sitting in behind that first panel. Devin says, very cool page, Christopher. Thank you, Devin. Yolanda, I'm sorry, that's very nice. So then you can have, we can cut back to that size of width, or that width of panel, but a much shorter panel to focus more intensely on, BDI Johnson, who's, oh no, this is because this panel is nothing but giant spaceships coming towards them to land. We gotta go, So then, the last panel is, you can do something fun, like have, pardon me, his little spaceship, flying, taking off from the ground, because we gotta go. Bad guys are coming. So, and then this part here would be your sky or your city shapes in the background. There's your, the clouds, like the atmosphere up above. And then this is just, you just do it a dark value or a black, because this doesn't matter. This is probably going to be overlapped in text. So just because it's that, you don't want to leave void spaces unnecessarily, but you can utilize sparse areas in a composition or void spaces on a page for placement of text. So the other aspect to consider is that the same rules, as I'm applying those to the visual parts of it, you're going to find an awful lot of similarity in the text, but with these little differences here and there, like I've noted for you. So with that in mind, realizing that, back to the start here, we're trying to get the eye from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. Now, if it's the visual stuff is just the same person staring forward in every panel, next panel, which is done, or in the case of the briefcase, right? You can even photocopy the panel and just repost it again and again. But that text is what carries our eye. So you've got to make sure that you think of this to this for the text as well. So if you've got, and well, I'll pop this back up again. If you've, like in the page for today, the text starts on the left side and it moves across the top of the right. But then it does this turn down and moves right alongside the visual elements that are presented to this secondary left point, like a sort of indented left point from the side of the image, and it carries us across to the right again. So it's kind of like a really warped 2. But what that gives us is a movement of our eye, even though there's a sort of, a busyness in the photo, a busyness in the illustration of all these pieces of information moving in a weird direction. The text carries us through the image and still gets us from top left to bottom right. Yolanda says, my dog's wanting to go for a walk now. Thanks for sharing. Have a great day. Yeah, have a great day, Yolanda. Thanks very much for hanging out. So the text can work the same way as the visual, or the text can carry order into the confusing aspect of the visual elements that have been put together. You can still have a controlled direction that you're presenting to the reader by the placement of the text. Either way, left, up right, the upper left corner, bottom right corner. Okay? And like the image I showed you today, there's a really loose sense of panels in today's page. But I mean, I could have done things like, broken, what are called gutters. And gutters are when you've got 2 panels side by side, okay, on a page, that space in between is a gutter. It's where all of the other stuff has been washed out in between. It's just, it's a break. But an official term is called the gutter. But I like to look at it as a break. The moment that you have moment to moment, like the moment that you have panel to panel to panel to panel to panel to panel, it's a rhythm. And you can do a combination of larger panels and smaller panels to change the pace of your rhythm. You can go to larger splash images to really make the readers just stop for a second. And you're going to put the most important piece of information on there, like, man, I got to get some bread on the way home, or probably something far more pertinent to the story at hand. So all of these little tools and all of these little tricks along the way takes you through the story. Now, Howard Chaykin is a comic book writer and illustrator who has this formula that he uses. I don't like formulas, for one. But Howard Chaykin's formula sits as so. And, okay, so he breaks a page down relatively in this way. And he says, but you got to shake it up. Don't just have the same thing. And then when you flip through one of his recent things, there's a lot of repetition. But the idea is that if there's a person here, they want to get over there. So you want to draw them looking as though they're directed to move across the image. Okay? But in said thing, you can present, here's the building, here's where he's got to get into this building, whatever it is. And your level of sophistication for the drawing makes, if it is of interest to the creator. So he gets there, where his buddy Bob is standing at the doorway. And so now you got him and Bob talking to each other. And then to make it more interesting is where we get into what I talked about yesterday with Bollywood's 22 panels. You can have one of them in the foreground, and the other one standing there to the side of him, just to give it a more dramatic panel. But you still want to remember to leave this little bit of room, like in here or in here, for your text. And then we zoom in on this second person up close who's like, really? All right. Pardon me. So there's an engagement between two characters, and in our last panel is the two of them. And again, they're off to the side again. But you see how we've got this information to move this way. And now here's the two of them, whether they're in front of this building still or they're now moving to the vehicles to go and do whatever the action is, it doesn't matter. But X, and what people might not be conscious of is gone to the house, there's to the guy, this guy's going to that guy, there's the two guys. There's the two guys talking. Here's the second guy going, all right. And then our ending panel is the summation panel, So we've got the static visual component, which is a play between these two things, but it's left all of this room for all that text. So while the visual image might be pretty staid, the textual part of it is going to make up for, our the storytelling component. So things like that to consider. And in the execution of the page, you want the eye moving across. And if you're going to have more than one layer, you need to let the eye move like this to get it from upper left to bottom right. All right. I hope this helps, folks. This is just the first part of things. If people are interested in this and people are enjoying this, I can keep doing these day to day. If people are liking this, and this gives them some understanding in storytelling visualization. Now, what I've done today is primarily showed you for a sequential application, sequence of events, sequence of dialogue. Okay, sequential. Now, tomorrow, sequential. Tomorrow, I can show static. And the difference between sequential and static is it's going to focus more so on, basically splash images and how we utilize limited images, like limiting our images down to 2 or 3 panels, or one panel only, or one panel with 2 or 3 aspects to it. And but because we're storytelling, we're going to look at examples of it with text and without. And one of the things that I'm going to show you in the process of that tomorrow is something that I grew up with, and it's a annual that used to come out in the 60s and 70s, and maybe even the 80s. I don't think they are nowadays, though. Of a bear, a character from England, a bear named Rupert. And it's a fantastic way to show people how we can do so much in so many different ways to convey story.